This is Bonjour Chai, the Not Seeing the Forest for the Trees edition. I'm Avi Finegold in Montreal, and I'm here with Melissa Lantsman in lockdown Toronto and Ilana Zackon in mildly less lockdown Vancouver. We are your frozen chosen. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Melissa?
Well, we're totally locked down in Toronto and in the surrounding areas, and frankly across the province. So I'm here.
Hanging in there.
Hanging in. How are you, Avi?
I'm good. I just found out from a friend of mine who lives in Montreal and works in Cornwall that the border actually is, closed, and there is a OPP as he goes in every single day. I was like, yeah, what about coming back? He goes, Sûreté de Quebec, yeah, about 1/3 of the time they're there. So, it's okay to they're doing spot checks, but apparently I can't leave my province right now. So, but that's okay. I have nowhere to go.
Fair enough.
Ilana, you're heading out. How are the bars and restaurants in Vancouver?
Closed. I mean, you can sit on a patio. Yeah, basically around the time of Passover, they announced that we were going back a step. Technically, you were allowed to congregate with up to 10 people outdoors, but we were now told it is highly discouraged. I don't know why they don't just change the rule.
Yeah, we haven't had patios in a while, but whatever.
I haven't really been going.
Have we just relegated to ourselves that we're going to be in this forever, and that there might be no end in sight?
I wouldn't go that far.
That's the Toronto feeling.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's the Ontario feeling.
The end is in sight.
Well, vaccines are rolling out here quicker than they were before. Yeah. My age category should be around early June, so that's keeping me feeling a little more hopeful.
Have you guys seen the vaccine selfie movement?
Yes.
If you don't take a picture,
everyone taking a picture.
It didn't happen.
I did take a picture of mine. The one that I didn't see the. I mean, I've been seeing those. Yeah, they're everywhere. The thing that I've gotten is in America, the new hashtag, waxed and vaxxed.
Oh boy.
Oh, okay.
That's original.
It's a different podcast.
Ready to take on the summer. Anyways. On today's episode, we talk about leadership, its failures, and its potential for the future. We interview Jason Sherman about his documentary, My Tree, in which he searches for a lost bar mitzvah gift and he finds himself instead. And we premiere a new segment, so stay tuned for that. But before we get to our first topic, let's hear from our first sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Atelier Lou Bijouterie in Westmount, Quebec. Atelier Lou specializes in custom-designed jewelry, as well as many lines including Anzi, Deacon & Francis, Dana Bronfman, and many, many more. If you're looking to upgrade that engagement ring or pop the question, come talk to Eric and design the ring of your dreams. Atelier Lou is offering a promo code for all Bonjour Chai listeners using BON18 at checkout for 10% off your order at atelierlou.com.
It seems like anything anyone wants to talk about these days is the failures in leadership of our elected officials or our communal leaders. But is the leadership actually bad, or are they being asked to do something which is truly beyond any of us to handle? Does Judaism have anything to say about leadership? What about leaders in the Jewish community? Are they doing okay? What are you guys thinking? Is this really like massive failed leadership? Is there some hope? Where are we going from this?
Well, look, I'm gonna start here, and I'm just going to say that the feeling out there is that there is a crisis of leadership, and the actual system is broken, and there's an unwillingness to go against the grain or think outside of the box, or even take just a modicum of the real advice. And I think the crises that we're seeing right now, they don't really stick to a script, and they're not really easy answers. But I think there's a feeling that the people in those leadership positions are exactly the opposite of what's required in this current context. And maybe that's always the case, but that's the feeling, and it's a dangerous place to be when people don't believe in their institutions and their leadership.
Where do you think this lack of trust, is it, where does this come from? Is it just people started trusting and they just stopped?
Well, no, I think from a political perspective is that we've got politicians making all kinds of decisions every single day. Some are harder, some are easier, but none of them in some regard have affected the very way that we live and we interact with each other, they're not this close to us, ever. It's usually, people moving money around and there's some policy changes, but there isn't something that there was never been a time where every single decision feels like it gets into every part of your day and your being. And I think as a result, more people are paying attention to it and really questioning, like, who are these people? Why don't they make any sense? And why aren't they doing sort of the simple common sense things that we've now known, particularly around COVID for 14 months?
So bringing it back to the Jewish element of this, in our modern day era, living in Canada as we do we see those, let's say, politicians or more authoritative figures as being our leaders? Or do you feel like you have a different authority figure that you look up to within the Jewish community?
I mean, I think historically there have always been different types of leaders, right? You have religious leaders, spiritual leaders, you have political leaders, and you have, the quiet leadership, the people that really hold no official position of power, but are they're out there and actually making stuff happen and making change work. What I would call quiet political leadership. And I mean, do people look up to their rabbis anymore? I don't know. Nobody looks up to me. I'm just some guy that does weddings and funerals and podcasts. There are great rabbinic leaders. There are people that people look up to, but you're pointing out the fact that the nature of leadership has changed both in the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community. How many people look to our leaders of government as like leaders that we aspire to be we don't look at our members of parliament, and our, premiers and go and say, this is what we should aspire to. This is what great leadership is. I mean, you don't feel that in the day to day. And so I think what it is that there's a vacuum in leadership. There's a vacuum in greatness in the leadership. And that's across the board, Jewish, not Jewish. And, there are few people that are like that. I mean, Jonathan Sachs was definitely a great leader, right? That really felt like he was a leader and was leading with his authority. But those people are becoming increasingly few and far between.
Sure. Do you think that people sort of, after we're out of this, this current crisis, I don't know if there's an end date on it, or if it just sort of slowly dissipates and we kind of forget about it and then we do the same thing next time it happens. Do you think people flock back to non-political leadership or community leadership, or do you think that we end up sort of lost in looking for something? What happens next, Avi?
I don't know. I actually think that we are in an era where people think that they don't need some sort of leadership. And they assume, meaning the work of leadership, right? Like, as you said, moving money around, government infrastructure, stuff like that. The vast majority of people don't feel that and never felt that. And so you become removed from leadership. And most of the things that you can do day to day, you don't think to yourself, I need somebody else to guide me in this. And so I think the nature of leadership has to shift, not back to reminding everybody, hey, we're here, we're going to do great, big, amazing things, and we're huge and we're important and you should look up to us. But shifting the nature of where it's at. I think that I've said this in the past. I think communal institutions are going to be reshaped in different ways. People are going to become more autonomous in their own Jewish lives. And I think that people are going to start to become more autonomous in their own political lives. And they're going to recognize that the political leadership is there to get very important things done. But in terms of, changing the or shaping the dialogue or the national, discussion on various issues is not necessarily going to be relied on by the political leadership anymore. That's just my thing. Look, sorry, I'm going to keep going on here just for a minute. I've always believed that it's hard to critique leadership. Simply because of a very famous line from political science, that we don't know what we don't know. I personally don't know what goes on behind closed doors, and so it's hard to critique those decisions because I don't know what's going on behind there, and I don't know what are the factors that I have zero clue on, right? Foreign policy decisions, I don't know what's going on there, right? There is so much that is happening behind closed doors, behind really secret locked doors, that it's better to not critique. Transparency is where trust comes up and where you're able to open these things up. Rabbis have learned that you no longer tell somebody, right, trust me, this is what you have to do. It's, here's everything that I can tell you about this. You make your own decisions for yourself. Or if you want to know why I told you to do this, I'm going to show you the process. Definitely, if you care, even if you don't care, I'm going to try to pass it along because I want to show you that I'm being transparent. There's nothing opaque. Opaqueness in leadership, right, do not go hand in hand. And that's where I think that failure in leadership is happening right now that you guys are talking about, is that there's just decisions are being made. They don't seem to be made based on science, and they are so opaque, and it's just trust me. And the only thing that I can say about that is that I don't know if you're making the right decisions, but I know that many people are making the wrong decisions. And that's becoming clear to me and clear to a lot of people.
I think it really depends on how you define a leader. I know we're talking about the pandemic specifically, but bringing it to a broader scope. I would say that what did you call them? The quiet leaders?
Soft leaders, soft power.
Soft power. The quiet leaders, I don't know. I feel like those people might be the most influential in the times that we live in, because if you look back to, at least from an Ashkenazi perspective, when we were back in Eastern Europe and kind of how communities were developed, and they had their rabbi and they went to the rabbi for counsel. I'm mostly thinking of Fiddler on the Roof right now. But anyway, so, and then now we're here.
That's a documentary. That premiered at Hot Docs and at Tefka.
100%. My point that I'm trying to make is that back in Eastern Europe, it was a different structure. And now that, we're in Canada, we're a little bit more spread out. And I think because of that, and because a lot of people are not affiliated necessarily to a synagogue, especially in the younger generations, but even in older generations, sometimes, like, people are all spread out. They might not live in a place with a strong Jewish community. And if they do, the organizations that popped up as a result of, coming to North America are the leaders now. So it goes down to as small as, a Hillel leader, or someone who volunteers for their Jewish school, like you know what I mean? There's so many ways of being involved. And I think those are leaders in different ways that maybe we can look at leadership in smaller scales. And those are the people that are making a difference.
I think this notion that we look at, our politicians as leaders is something that we've concocted. I think it's always been communities. I think it's always been civil society. It's like, where do these ideas come from? Of course, they come from stakeholders, they come from associations, they come from religious communities, and many of the people that were, that are brought into these quiet leadership positions become, they get to the decision-making table, but they get there with an entire sort of history and worldview of what has worked in their community. So I don't think the two are necessarily different. I just think that we have become so reliant on somebody coming up to a podium with flags behind them to give us all of the answers. And at some point, we've got to think for ourselves, and we've got to do what's best to ourselves. And we're looking for this because there's no clear right answer on this.
There's a famous moment in a bootleg that I have of a Bruce Springsteen concert from the 80s when Reagan had been using his Born in the USA, misusing it, and he was really there was a lot of anger in there, and he says, "Blind faith in your leaders will get you killed." And he was clearly referring to, the Vietnam War, but we have to stop having this blind faith. And I see this happen in, in the rabbinic world, and it definitely has reverberations back to the political sphere. And I'm curious, Melissa, what your response to this is as somebody who is in this position, right? So I find that there's often two types of rabbis. You have rabbis who, this is my position on a topic, right? This is what I believe. I have a well thought out belief based on what I've learned, in rabbinical school and my constant Jewish studies and what I see in the current events or whatever it is. This is my belief in Judaism. This is where I think, I may be pro a certain halachic position or pro a certain, civil rights decision based on a Jewish idea or whatnot whatever it might be. And that's that. And people either flock to that position, and you are I may teach you or preach to you if you are of this same ilk because I publicize my ideas and that's it. And then you have rabbis that are the opposite. They're like, listen, I know a lot of stuff. I'm in my congregation. My congregation may believe something very, very different than I believe. That doesn't mean that I have to impose my belief on the other person. I'm going to be responsive to what my congregants tell me, right? I may be, anti, full trans inclusion in my community for whatever reason, and I maybe want to slow walk it. But if everybody in the community is telling me that this is where we have to go, then this is the place that we have to go, and I have to catch up with what my constituents are. And people are often confused when it comes to, for example, members of parliament. Are you in a position where you are stating a position and I either vote for that position or I vote for the other person's position? Or are you representing the people that you are intending to represent, and you find out that 80%, I just want to win, I want to represent you, whatever your idea might be. And so if 80% of my population in my riding believes this, that's going to become part of my platform, regardless of my personal beliefs. Right. And that's where a lot of confusion in leadership comes about, because people are often not sure where they stand, where their leaders stand, on the polls between these two things.
Look, I think it's somewhere in the middle. Like they've elected you because you have a certain worldview, certain dynamism to share that worldview and move the conversation forward. But of course, responsive leadership to the people that elected you is important. So the answer is that you can be half pregnant on this, and the truth is, it does come from somewhere in the middle. And I think that all leadership and all decisions are about negotiation. It's about seeing all of the sides. Like we've talked on this podcast. Like, I don't frankly agree with you two, on much. But I think the conversation is important to have in the community, and that's what drives us forward to have better outcomes, however that looks like, to be more connected, to be more responsive to each other, and to know that this is a big tent.
Yeah, I think that what you're highlighting there is actually a really interesting piece about the conversation, and one of the flaws, right, where we're talking about massive failed leadership, is that clearly the people that are bearing the brunt of these decisions, whether it's stay-at-home orders, closing schools, closing indoor restaurants, people are not being listened to, and being not recognized. And it's not that I hear you and I'm sorry, but this is what you have to do because this is the science and I'm going to show it to you. The conversation isn't being happening, right? There are press conferences that are being sent out, right? And people are hearing this. They're like, I don't understand this because the doctors are not saying the same thing. And we just move on. And there's a breakdown in conversation between leaders and the population. And the best members of parliament are the ones that are always in touch with their constituents.
And I'm just gonna add one more thing. Like it is on us as well. So when did we become a people where we wait for somebody to come to a podium and tell us how to live our lives? And I think that's a failure of society as well. Like we've got to be able to question the rules, and we've got to be able to have the power to vote on this stuff.
Yeah, I think.
Alana, you get the last word.
I think it gets tricky too, though, with a pandemic. We haven't really experienced this type of incident in our lifetimes before. So if nobody was telling us what to do, everyone would just be running around with like chickens with their heads cut off. So
yeah, it's interesting. And sorry, I'm going to give you back the last word, Ilana. I just wanted to say that the same is true within the Jewish community, right? That we waiting for our stuff to happen in the political level but nobody waits in the Jewish community, right? You just live your life and you don't necessarily often think about where the rabbis are happening. Ilana, give us the last word. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, going back to my point before, I think it comes down to a bit of a mix of what we're all saying, forming your own critical thoughts, doing your research, making your own stance, and then living as safely as possible. If we're talking about the pandemic, you don't want to put other people's lives at risk. And you have to, at the same time, recognize that, we live in an economy, and sometimes the choices that are being made by our higher ups aren't necessarily the smartest ones. But I don't know what else there is to do. Sorry, maybe that's not the best wrap up that you were hoping for, but that's all I got.
All right, moving on. Coming up, we're going to be hearing from playwright and film director Jason Sherman. In 1975, Jason Sherman, like many others of that era, received a certificate for his bar mitzvah. Instead of a Canada Savings Bond, this certificate represented a tree that had been planted in his name in Israel by the Jewish National Fund. Nearly 40 years later, Sherman goes to Israel in search of that very tree and discovers that all was not as it seems. The resulting story unfolds over the course of a feature-length documentary that is premiering at the Hot Docs Festival, and we are joined by the director and star, Jason Sherman. Jason, welcome to Bonjour Chai.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, without giving too much away, we want people to, log in and watch the movie when it premieres officially. Can you tell us a bit about what unfolds once you arrive in Israel?
Well, of course, to do that, let me give you a little bit of the backstory before I get there. And by the way, I don't mind giving too much away. I'm not into the whole spoiler culture.
There's no spoilers.
I think it's just a way for bully boys to do their thing on the interwebs. So what happened is, probably about 10 years ago, somewhere around there, I went to Israel for the first time in my life. admittedly much later than most members of the tribe go. Most Jewish kids I know went when they were still kids. I went when I was in my late 40s. And I went because I was invited to a theater festival, because for most of my life I was a playwright by trade. And when I was there, I started to get all those feelings that one, naturally come to you after a lifetime of being raised with Israel in the background as being an important part of Jewish life, even in Toronto, or perhaps you could say in some ways, especially in Toronto, that even though you're not there, it's a very important part of your life, and it's important to support it. And you grow up with the stories and the history and the this and that, and so being there for the first time and experiencing it and being on the land, well, over the land first as you fly in. I remember a strong, really strong feeling as I saw it for the first time. I was traipsing around, and I thought I did feel a strong connection, but I also felt a kind of a strange disconnect, that there was something like I wasn't fully, wholly embracing it, wholly with a W. And I thought, well, I wanted to, I started thinking about a real connection to not just as, a spiritual one or a cultural one, an historical one, but what made me part of this place. And the tree came to my mind. Really did spring up sort of like that. So what actually happened was that I got the idea to look for my tree, but I decided to put it into a play. The idea of someone looking for the tree to write it, as a sort of a plot point for a play. I have written several plays about growing up Jewish, being Jewish, relationship to Israel, and so on. And I had left behind this sort of group of characters that were in these plays for a long time. And when I was in Israel that first time, I thought I'm gonna go back to those characters. And one of the characters was gonna visit Israel for the first time and go look for his tree and so on. So I wrote that play. It went through a whole series of development, workshops and so on. But as I was working on it, I thought, actually, I think I want to make the movie itself. I want to make that doc. And so, yeah, I started to look into my tree and couldn't find the certificate that you get. It was 40 years earlier, as you mentioned. So I had to go through a whole series of steps to try to see if I could find, not the actual individual tree. I mean, you go to High Park in Toronto or wherever, and you can see people have put plaques on individual trees. I wasn't thinking I'd do that, but at least I could find the forest or park or where nature reserve where it had been planted. And I sought help from the people that plant the trees. Now, I didn't know anything about the Jewish National Fund at the time. I didn't know about them until I discovered some other certificates in the family that the family had planted trees. And so I contacted JNF Canada, I contacted JNF Israel / Socalled, and they couldn't help me. They couldn't or wouldn't help me. That's another part of the story we can get into later if you want. And so, yes, I go to Israel. And I'm sorry for this very long-winded answer, but the actual finding of the tree wouldn't make much sense without it. I get to Israel. I have hired a researcher to help me find the tree. She determines that given the year that it would have been planted, it probably was in one of these three places, most likely Canada Park. So I go to Canada Park. This is, mind you, after some other diversions to, meet a kibbutz gardener and a forester who tell me what kind of tree might have been, problems with those trees, etc. But eventually, yes, I do come to Canada Park, and I am taken on a tour of Canada Park by a gentleman who started an organization called Zuchrot, an Israeli Jewish fellow named Eitan Bronstein Aparicio, who tells me that there once was an Arab village beneath where my tree now stands. And he tells me the story of how that village and two others nearby were taken in 1967, immediately destroyed. The thousands of people who lived there sent on their way on the road to Ramallah, never to return, never to be allowed to return, because of the forest that stands there now. The end, or the beginning, if you will.
If I could cycle back a little bit,
yes.
You wrote a play on similar themes before making this venture out. So how does the play differ from what you encountered in the doc version?
Well, so the play is has many of the same elements of the journey that I go on, but in a fictional setting. And there are there's another story going on top of the the search that character goes on, and it serves a slightly different purpose in the play. But that play has never been done. It probably never will be done
Okay.
for various reasons. But I mean, really, all I meant in taking us through that was, is to say that that's really what sparked the idea of actually doing it as a film. It didn't occur to me in the moment, I should make a documentary about this, until I had basically had written a kind of a different version of it.
So, it's almost as if, watching the film, it keeps bringing up this unstated question, right? That, Jewish organizations are often defending their positions almost exclusively as being right, and without often the ability to admit that there was some wrongdoing on their part, right? And while the film is very much a personal journey, you're really underscoring this notion that organizationally, communally, we have a hard time recognizing that while we may be doing great things, we're often doing things that are wrong, and admitting the wrongdoing is one of the failures of the Jewish community. Do you feel that? Is that something that was, really one of the goals of the organization of the film? Do you think that there's a way out of that? Do you think that there's a way forward?
So there are a few questions in there, so let me try to parse them. I'll address that by speaking specifically about the organization and it really is one organization. Well, there are two. JNF Canada does separate itself from Cacao. Or at least they have in a recent posting on their website. And for people that don't know, Cacao stands for Keren Kayemet LeYisrael, which is the Israeli version, if you will, of the Jewish National Fund. And they are separate organizations, but neither one of them wanted to participate in the film. I don't know why. I tried. Lord knows I tried. I wrote letters. I made phone calls. I hired someone in Israel to help me organize interviews. And you've seen the film. You know my interview style. It is. I was not about to turn into Mike Wallace when I was with the people from the JNF. I was there to learn everything I could about my tree, including when it was planted, where it was planted, why it was planted. And who better to answer those questions than the Jewish National Fund? They planted the tree, but for some reason they chose not to participate, as I say. So to answer your question, does the JNF have trouble admitting that there's something else going on in those forests, other than the nice green planting of, the greening of certain parts of Israel? Well, I mean, the evidence would suggest so. The evidence is that a number of Jewish National Fund parks and forests, by one estimate, around some 90 depopulated Palestinian villages, sit underneath these parks without really any recognition, except for the one in Canada Park, and even that recognition, which was hard fought for by this organization, Zocalled, that I mentioned before, does not speak of the destruction, the expulsion, so on and so forth. I do think that people have a hard time. First of all, let's separate between what people know and don't want to admit or talk about, and what people just don't know. And this is an important point for me. It's a really important point for me, because one of the things I discover in the film is that my parents gave me that tree. And I needed to know if they knew about the village and the destruction, and basically the disappearance not only of the village, but of the memory of the village, which is a whole other thing. And in talking to John Goddard, a journalist who first wrote about Canada Park for Saturday Night Magazine, I learned, much to my relief, I have to say, that they wouldn't have known, because the story just wasn't known in Canada at the time of my bar mitzvah, which was 1975. John didn't write his article until 80 or 81, something like that. And it was many years after that CBC's Fifth Estate did a piece about Canada Park. So I just don't think a lot of people knew And a number of people I speak to in the film talk about this fact that donors just don't know. And if they knew, they should know. They should be given the opportunity to know, and then they can make their own decision about whether they want to plant a tree and whether they want to address the underlying or overtopping, however you want to put it, issues. Now, if you want to expand that out into other organizations, I mean, we can talk about that. The focus of the film is the tree, is the organization responsible for it, and yes, to a certain extent, it is. You could say that JNF is somewhat emblematic of this more general attitude about the past, about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that there is only one story permitted. And we just don't like to hear the other story. Yeah, when I would do plays and we'd have Q&As, obviously, and I say obviously because it seems like it's de rigueur these days to always talk about the play with an audience right afterwards. And I would often, get questions like, your play is really unbalanced. And I always came away from those believing that the reason that questioner would make a statement, not a question, like that, is because I would present the Palestinian narrative alongside the Israeli Jewish narrative. People just aren't used to that, and it can be hard to hear it. For if you all your life you've grown up believing only the one story. And you see that in the film. You see people struggling with it. You see me
So,
struggling with
Jason, I'll continue on that point, and on the point of balance. I know that this is a personal journey for you, and it looks at one part of JNF's history, but they have become and they are a household name and charity in Canada that that's involved in social infrastructure and building cardiac centers and parks for children with autism and a whole number of things for the Jewish people in the Jewish homeland. And does the story erase all of that? Because I think that's
wonderful, Melissa. I wish they'd come on camera and told me all those things. I really do.
But look, is there a responsibility by a filmmaker to tell the whole story? Because I think you would find that in Canada, much of the giving is associated with with that narrative as well, which is frankly missing.
Is that right? Is that what people mostly think about the JNF? I mean, I think it's wonderful that they do those things, but their forward-facing story is, we have planted 240 million trees in Israel from 1901, and that is the focus of the film. So let's say, for example, that they had come on camera, or that I had mentioned it at some point, or someone else had mentioned it. That's great. I don't think that detracts from the story that I'm telling, does it?
Well, it's certainly a missing piece.
Is it?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm gonna agree with you, Jason, because this is not an either or, Melissa. This is a yes and. They can be doing wonderful things and building cardiac centers and planting 240 million trees. They can be doing all of this stuff for Israel and still harbor something which is less than savory, for which they are not talking about. And I think the vast majority of people will recognize that they are doing good things. And I think the point of the film is just to say, that's wonderful. Most people aren't aware of it. Most people think they're doing great things. I just want to point out, the director, Jason right here, wants to point out that there are things which are not being said.
Yeah.
And
I appreciate that. I appreciate both what you're both saying, but I want to get back to the R word, responsibility. If let's take it on face value that a filmmaker has a responsibility to present both sides of an issue, or 3 sides, or 12 sides. I'll repeat. I did everything I could to get the JNF, both in Canada and in Israel, to take part in the film. So my question to you is, what is their responsibility to accept my offer? to take part in the film and tell me all the wonderful things they do.
Absolutely
I,
fair, and I'm
right?
not sort of not coming here as a representative of the JNF. I'm just asking the question:
Mm-hmm.
is there a missing piece in this? Because there is a whole lot more to the JNF. I grew up with it just like you did, and it's evolved since then. And look, I've paid attention to how it's evolved. And are you suggesting that others haven't? Or maybe that just wasn't the piece of your film.
I'm not gonna say whether what other people think or have experienced. I know my experience, and that's what I put in the film. And my experience is I knew nothing about the JNF going into this film. And that's someone who is fairly well read about Israel. So they were a mystery to me. In some ways, they still are. But I also believe, and you may not believe this, but I believe that we're part of a continuum. So this conversation is part of the film now. And so you've put it out there and thank you for doing that they also do all these wonderful things. And I maintain that I would have included those wonderful things in the movie if only, not only sat down with me, but agreed to let me use the interview. But anyway, I think we're getting away a little bit from the main thrust of the film, which is the use to which that tree was put. That's the story of the film.
I was struck actually by to underscore what you're saying. There's a line in middle of the film where one of the Palestinians whose village keeps getting razed basically to the ground says, "If you have land, you have life." And that to me is almost the tagline of the film, that the trees put roots down in the land, and trees are there to say, we are here, we're not going anywhere. And it's easier to have a forest, and it's more secure to have a forest than it is to have grassland, right? And that this becomes this big idea. And I think that's that theme there of saying it's trees are there because they are unspoken sentries, right, for holding on to this land. And there's something really powerful about that image.
There is, and it was really important to me to you know, expand the story, if you will, so that I didn't want to go there and say, oh, this terrible thing happened way back then, shame on those who did it. That would be one thing, and to look at my responsibility for it and complicity in it and so on, how I was made complicit. But the fact is that it's still going on. And so the question I ask myself, and it's a question I'm asking myself, and if other people want to take that on, great. And if you don't, that's up to you. But the question is, what is my responsibility for the fact that it's still going on? And can we have an organization, Melissa, to come back to your point, I don't want to harp on it, but can the JNF, be that organization, does all those wonderful things, but doesn't do those other things that aren't so wonderful, and why not? And why can't we have a conversation about it? That's really what I want to know. Why why not? Why can't we? Sort of come back to Avi, your first question, the question you asked about or do we not even want to talk about these things? I think we have to. I really think we have to. I'm really hoping that people aren't going to dismiss the film just on hearsay. You can dismiss it after you see it. That's cool. That's up to you. And if you don't want to see the film, that's fine too. But if you see the film, I really hope that you're going to take it on in the spirit in which it's intended, which is to open up conversations about these things.
I was curious, going back to your playwriting and writing, and this is just coming from my perspective because I also work in theater, how this documentary might affect or influence or inform your future work moving forward. I don't know exactly when you actually shot the documentary. Was it recently?
The scenes in Israel were shot 5 years ago. How will it affect my future work in theater?
I meant more so in terms of the content that you're writing, because you just went on this whole journey, and it does seem, and in my research, I noticed that you focus on a lot of these themes of being Jewish, Israel, and the conflict and all that. So how might this experience of finding your tree inform or change the themes or deepen certain topics?
I don't want to make it seem like I'm being glib, but I really, the answer is I'm not sure. I guess we'll have to sort of see. I have written, you write a few plays on these themes. I also write widely on other topics, and I likely will again. Um, but we'll see. I mean, it may be that I want to, I mean, it's such a huge topic, right? And I really struggled with keeping it focused. But it raises so many other things. I mean, we've touched on a couple of them, and I think that's a good thing that it can raise those. And I've people who've seen earlier cuts of the film have said, "Well, I went down this rabbit hole after seeing it, and I wanted to know more about that and that," and that's great. But I might, one of the things I had to not include thematically in the film is a discussion about sort of parallels with Canada and our Indigenous people, and it just, don't want to get into the weeds.
We also have a great culture. We have a huge culture of tree planting as well. BC.
We do.
No. I mean, I didn't because I'm a good Jewish boy from Montreal. But many people I know went to tree plant in BC for a summer.
That's not actually what they did there.
You're right. Sorry, that's what you're talking. Yeah, exactly. The backbreaking, work of and the black flies and but I gather Melissa's talking about extracurricular activities. So it may lead me to other, to write something, but something closer to home, if you will, physically closer. I mean, the film is partly half set here as well, and that is important. That it's talking about, the relationship between here and there. But definitely, it makes me want to make more movies.
I'd like to really, moving towards the end here, I want to wrap things up. But it seems to me that one of the strongest takeaways from the movie comes at the very end, where you actually interview the former president of the JNF. I'm curious, actually, first of all, as an aside, this clearly was not an authorized official through the front channels of the JNF. Did you just find him in the phone book and call him up and he was like, "Yeah, I'll..."
Pretty much.
Great.
Pretty much. I mean, I found, as you see in the film, his name comes up in a bunch of documents in the archives. I look him up online. Thankfully, he has, a website and a contact email, and he was more than happy to chat with me. More than happy to. And you're right, it wasn't official, but then he's sort of emeritus.
But what's interesting, and really it's a highly personal and beautiful moment, and I encourage everybody to watch it, even if they're about to hear the spoiler. But it's really a touching moment where you tell him this stuff, and he's really soaking it in for the first time, really, and you're not questioning whether he is papering things over, and there's this moment where you ask him, right, was I wrong to feel bad? And he says no, right, I wasn't. You weren't wrong to feel bad based on what you saw. And then he, proceeds to give a convoluted, in your, estimation, maybe some sort of convoluted answer for why he thinks it may have been justified or this or that. I'm not going to get into that piece. But to me, the universal takeaway of that moment, and really the upshot of the entire film, is not that you're giving people an answer, and to say that the answer is not X. Right, Israel is great because Canada has planted hundreds of millions of trees over, the history of Canada. It's just. But the answer is not that, but it is this, in which the narrative is purely, from the Palestinian side. It's about raising these questions, right? And that moment where he's really grappling with the question for the first time, literally, in his entire life, right? I think that you've succeeded in a brilliant moment as a documentary filmmaker to go and have us question, right, the things that we have been taught, without giving us any answers, without saying this is the right way to think. You must be like independent Jewish voices. It is perfectly legitimate once you have come up with an answer, with the multiplicity of answers, to come up with your own answer, and it may disagree with you, as a filmmaker, but the fact that you're giving people this opportunity to ask themselves these new questions is a great moment. And I think that that's where we're standing in 2021 with so many of our institutions, and this one especially.
Well, thank you, Avi. That is a powerful moment, if I can stand back. But even in the moment, I felt it, that I could see I don't know if he'd ever been asked those questions before. It certainly felt like it in the moment. And you're quite right. I also, I mentioned I didn't turn into Mike Wallace. I did not want to, wag a finger, in that gentleman's face. I just wanted to hear his truth, and he gave it to us. And I think his answer was, although it took a few twists and turns, it was, in a sense, there was a straight line through. And that straight line is, we were there first, and besides, they ran away. So that's his truth and his understanding. And for people watching who might know differently, or have a different take on things, then it's up to you to, to struggle with that. Which, do you like? In a way, it's easier to believe his truth. It's a good story. It's a simple story. It's harder to go and dig into the archives and the other, histories and the things that are coming out and continue to come out and grapple with, well, maybe it wasn't as simple as that, and so on and so forth. But hopefully I've presented that in a way that is you're able to absorb and then walk away with the questions, as you say.
Well, thank you, Jason Sherman, for sharing with us your truth. For those who want to learn Jason's truth and to come to their own conclusions, or at least raise the questions within themselves, you can watch the film. It's called My Tree. It's at Hot Docs. When is the official premiere?
Tomorrow, Thursday, April 29th. Plays till May 9th.
April 29th at Hot Docs. Check it out, and hopefully reopen a great dialogue in the Canadian Jewish community. Thank you again.
And I want to thank you guys. I really appreciate this conversation. And I hope it's emblematic of the kinds of conversations that will come out of the film. And I mean that.
We'd like to start trying something new here. We'd like to highlight some rabbinic voices from across the nation as they share some bit of wisdom with us. Today, let's hear from Rabbi Aaron Polansky, who is the rabbi at the Beth Israel congregation in Kingston, Ontario.
Hi. So I don't know about you, but I don't have any time. I don't even have time to record this for you, but we've carved it out here. My kids are just chomping at the bit, trying to get my attention, and there's just no time. And then on the other hand, I feel like all we have is time to sit in our homes and just wait for this lockdown to be finished and this pandemic to be over and to get to normal life. So sort of two opposite things happening at the same time. On the one hand, there's not enough time, and on the other hand, there's really just too much of it. And this week's Torah portion speaks to me about time. There's a couple of verses right at the beginning of Leviticus where we are commanded to set aside time. So it says, speak to the Israelite people and say to them, these are my fixed times, the fixed times of the eternal, which you shall proclaim as sacred occasions. Now, Rashi and many other commentators say that that's about the festivals, but Avraham ibn Ezra, he says that that is about Shabbat, and specifically because it says, these are my fixed times, moadai. So he's saying that Shabbat is fixed by God, whereas the other festivals, the other appointed times, are actually fixed by people. And he explains that. He says, back in the days of the temple, the Beit Din had to hear from witnesses who say they saw the new moon, and then they would know when the festival needed to be established. And then later on, they figured out calculations to determine the timing of the festivals. But all of that was done by people, but not Shabbat. Shabbat belongs to God, and God has told us that Shabbat occurs on the seventh day, and that is that. So, in other words, time doesn't belong to us. As much as we lament having too much of it or not enough of it, it's out of our hands. It belongs to God. The passing of time, the timing of our Sabbaths and festivals does not depend on us, but we very much depend on it. And I think that if we are to take the pressure off of trying to control our time and just go with it and let go of it and realize that it really belongs to God and not to us, then maybe we won't be so stressed out about either having too much of it on the one hand or not enough of it on the other hand. Hope that helps and makes sense. Shabbat shalom.
And let's move on to our nachas of the week, where we'd like to highlight something which has come across our radar and given us some nachas as Jewish Canadians. Melissa, what's your nachas of the week?
Oh, well, since we've been having this conversation throughout the show about, about leadership and frankly, film, I'm going to make a plug here. The Hot Docs Documentary Film Festival is coming up. There are a multitude of titles, including My Tree, which we just heard about, but other thinking films that get you really, really questioning. I'm plugging this because I'm on the board of Hot Docs. I'm really proud of this festival, and I'm really proud about the work that they do in raising up filmmakers to ask the real tough questions. So if you're sitting at home like you are in Ontario and you're never leaving your house, I got something for you to do. So check it out online. Hot Docs International Film Festival.
There's a whole slate of Jewish films. There's also
there's a lot of interesting films. There's you've always got the the questioning on Holocaust film. There's a short called Scumboy, which is a South African Jewish trans man living his life.
Amazing.
And check it out. There's lots of titles. You can just type in Jewish, which is sometimes where I start.
That's where you start with everything, right?
More or
Your
less.
Google searches are always Jewish.
Yeah,
blank.
I get up in the morning and just search Jewish on the internet.
Alana.
What about you?
What's
Alana.
your nachas of the week?
On the movie theme, but on a lighter tone, if you're looking to not think as much, I just heard about a new movie that is written and starring Billy Crystal and Tiffany Haddish. A veteran comedy writer forms an unlikely friendship with a street singer. So, always great to have Jewish movies starring Jewish people. Apparently, they're friends in real life. Apparently, he was at her bat mitzvah that she did, her famous one when she was in her 40s.
I could totally see that. Are you picturing like him as the rabbi at the bat mitzvah?
Yeah, totally. But that was the real life part. The movie, he's a writer.
I'm saying,
Oh.
no. I'm saying in real life, I'm totally imagining Billy Crystal as Tiffany Haddish's rabbi at her bat
That would
mitzvah.
be amazing. So the movie comes out May 7th. I'm not sure where you can see it because of COVID, but if you find out, let us know because I think this movie looks great.
What about you, Avi?
My nachas, I'll give two quick nachases. One, actually, is the platform that we use to record this is actually called riverside.fm. It's a podcast recording platform that allows for podcast creators to really showcase their product. It's a much higher quality recording software. Anyways, it's a great product. And I just found out that it's Israeli. So shout out to Riverside FM. Toda rabba. Thanks for giving us this product, and we hope to keep recording on it. And then the other thing that I'm going to talk about is I always laugh at Tu B'Shvat in Canada because it always comes up like in January or February, and it's like the last thing that people can think about is trees and nature and the environment. But come April, and like the world just comes alive. And I've been pushing my family to do, not pushing, I mean, we've been doing it. We've been starting to go on hikes once a week on Sundays. Do you know the Japanese have a term for going on hikes in nature? They call it forest bathing.
Sounds
Yeah. So yeah, it's not, my kids are just as reluctant to take a bath as they are to take a forest bath, but we've been going on family hikes every Sunday, and I highly encourage people to do this, to get out while you can, because you cannot lock down nature, and you can be outside and really enjoy, and it's such an antidote from like the many, many hours of screen time that we've been experiencing over the past months. So go grab your family, go grab your loved ones, go grab yourself, and just go, don't grab yourself, but go and go take a hike. Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for Thursday, April 29th. Our producer is Michael Fraiman. Technical production by Andre Goulet, and our music is by Socalled. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us a comment and a rating on the platform of your choice, and let us know what you think about our discussions on the CJN Lounge on Facebook. I'm Avi Finegold.
And I'm Melissa Lantsman.
And I'm Ilana Zackon.